I won you that day, by my sword. Your life, your death, they are both mine. If you wish to be free of me, the rules have not changed. It is as it was before. Draw your sword and take your freedom from me.
Griffith, please!
Would you settle for a smile and a fond farewell? So be it.
The Golden Age of Berserk follows the friendship and eventual betrayal of Guts by Griffith. The eclipse at the end of the arc is probably the most insane pieces of storytelling that I've ever experienced. The eclipse seems to be the cultivation of Griffith's ambition. Not only do we see the pile of corpses left through his previous war effort, but also the first-hand sacrifice of the surviving members of the Hawk. I think it's safe to say that during the eclipse, Griffith's ambition led him to become evil. That being said, there's more to say about ambition in the Golden Age than just Griffith's choice during the eclipse. By clicking on this video, you must have seen the title. While being a bit extreme, I do want to look at the effect of the characters' dreams on the overall story of Berserk, and what we can learn from them.
They are my able soldiers, it's true. They are dedicated comrades who sacrificed themselves for my dream so that it might be real. But that does not make them friends.
Griffith's goal or dream can be boiled down to amassing as much power as he can and owning his own kingdom. And while it may seem that he is a man who has it all during the Golden Age, I'd argue that he never truly benefits from his victories due to his blind ambition. He has comrades who adore him, a woman who loves him, and a best friend who respects him, which all go unnoticed. Due to this, Griffith slowly loses his humanity, and through the eclipse he fully discards whatever humanity he has left. Let's take a look at Griffith and Guts' relationship. In my opinion, there's conflicting information that the story gives us. However, I believe the information is only conflicting because Griffith is not honest with himself. Throughout the story, it's easy to see that Griffith and Guts are friends and care for one another. However, Griffith, a man who has never had a friend up until this point, is blind to this fact. Griffith's arrogance and disconnect with his own feelings set in motion events like the water fountain scene, which would eventually spiral into Guts leaving the Hawks altogether. I'm going to quickly play that scene for you to give context for the rest of the video. If you've already seen it, feel free to skip it.
Why do most men commit to affairs that result in bloodshed?
After watching this scene, it's fair to say that Griffith only lives by his dream, a dream that in his eyes consumes lesser men. It's also clear to see the distance Griffith puts between himself and everyone else. At one point, he even states that his dream is more precious than both friendship and love. By the end of the speech, Griffith claims that he could only consider himself friends with a man of equal ambition. Guts overhears this, which causes a chain reaction that by the end of the arc would cost both men everything. Here are some of my more personal thoughts on what Griffith says. 1. It's quite arrogant to claim that your desires or dreams outweigh other men's. 2. Due to Griffith's actions earlier in the story and his reaction to losing Guts later in the story, I'd say that Griffith subconsciously already views Guts as a friend, maybe even an equal, but is too arrogant to admit it or even realize it. We've done a lot of talking about Griffith, so now let's move on to Guts.
I can't stay. I can't live under the weight of his dream any longer, buried by it.
Guts was first introduced to us as a very aimless character, but slowly throughout the story and after countless battles, Guts found a home with the Band of the Hawks. The water fountain scene I played earlier was not only to understand Griffith's point of view, but also to show a turning point within Guts. Hearing that the man he respects most could never consider him a friend changes Guts' point of view for the rest of the Golden Age. Griffith's speech sets Guts on a path of self-discovery, which is probably what makes Guts such a relatable character and a prominent figure online today. And while this journey is such an interesting part of Guts' character, we must acknowledge that it's Griffith's warped worldview that sets him off on this path. One takeaway here is that Guts was fine being part of the Hawks, and finally had a place to call home, until he was shaken by Griffith's words that made him feel like he had to change. Guts putting so much emphasis on Griffith's definition of a friend caused Guts to doubt his entire existence, and I would caution that if Guts had defined values and more discipline, he wouldn't have been so shaken by Griffith's opinions. This is what made me think to make the video in the first place. It's clear that Griffith's ambitions led to the horrific events of the eclipse, but similarly it was Guts' search for his own dream that led to Griffith's downfall and the Hawks losing everything they had worked for. What is the narrative trying to say about dreams? Even Guts, a character simply trying to discover purpose in life, hurts those around him by trying to find his dream. So, are dreams evil?
Now.
Well, to be completely honest, I think the answer is no. But there are some clear narrative warnings in the Golden Age about dreams and dream chasing. Firstly, I think it's clear that both Guts and Griffith at different times in the story lose sight of those around them trying to chase their dreams. Griffith was so focused on his dream that he never got to have a connection with anyone in the Band of the Hawks besides Guts, which he eventually ruins through his own arrogance, leading to him getting tortured and basically becoming a vegetable. Then the only way he's able to get out of that state is by making the most horrific choice in storytelling. Then there's Guts, who abandoned his closest friends to find his own dream. This journey of self-discovery would be cut short, ending horrifically in the eclipse, leaving Guts with the daunting task of avenging the same friends he left behind. Although I will say it's mainly all Griffith's fault, I do think it's interesting that everything went downhill for the Band of the Hawk when Guts decided to follow his own dream.
First exposure to Berserk other than video essays was the 1997 anime. So to do a little tribute to that, I wanted to talk about 3 things in terms of character philosophy from that original 1997 anime. The first thing that I want to look at is the voiceover intro that accompanies every single episode that came out. It also is taken straight out of the manga, and there's an extra part to that intro that I'm going to cover later that's only in the manga. The second thing I'm going to cover is the Bonfire of Dreams, and the third thing being Griffith's speech on what makes a friend in his eyes. All these things tie together quite nicely, and I hope you enjoy the video. Okay, first things first, we should play the actual clip of the intro. It's pretty dope, and I know that not everyone is super fresh on watching the show.
In this world, is the destiny of mankind controlled by some transcendental entity or law? Is it like the hand of God hovering above? At least it is true that man has no control, even over his own will.
Ultimately, I think there's 2 parts that can be dissected from this. The first one being the classic pondering question of, is there free will, or is there kind of, this string of destiny pulling everyone along? Of course it exists in the story setting and then also in real life. I think you've probably pondered before if any of your decisions matter, or if you have this kind of preordained destiny that you're fated towards. And I think taking it back into real life is pretty interesting. Of course, all of us in our own head want to think that everything we do is under our control, but then the outside world is very humbling and you realize you don't have control over much. And it can be very comforting to think that you have a path lined out for you, like, oh, it is my destiny to do something, and having this kind of paradoxical mindset of I will push myself to get me where I'm supposed to be, because you're supposed to be somewhere great. I think this free will versus destiny concept exists in almost everybody's brain at some point or another. Where I think this gets super interesting is the second part of this excerpt, that says that basically men don't have any control even over their will. Basically saying we don't know about destiny, but men don't even have control over themselves. I think this is the perfect time to jump over to Griffith's speech about what makes a friend to him. Trust me, we'll get back to the intro in a little bit. Now, I called it Griffith's speech about friendship, but really it's just a conversation he's having with the princess. And it all starts with him bringing up something they talked about earlier about men being barbarous. What a lovely word. And Griffith basically says that this side of men can be a tool to win things or protect things, which leads the princess to say, like love and friendship. But Griffith is talking about something else, something deeper, a dream. Guts is a character without a dream. One night as he looks over the band of the hawk, he sees all the men and all their dreams, how it seems like they cast their dreams into one raging fire that won't go out. That fire is Griffith and his ambition. Meanwhile, Guts feels like his fighting is nothing but a random act, and his dream is nowhere to be found among the hawks. Specifically, he said he was only someone who came to warm himself by the fire. Let's go back to talking about the intro, specifically how no man has control even over his own will. I think this is super interesting in terms of the story because we can see Griffith and his passion drive towards his dream. He's so captivated by it that it pushes him to the farthest extreme possible that we see with the eclipse. Also, through his speech to the princess, we can see all the effects of a dream or ambition can have over a man, freeing him to the greatest extent or caging him to the darkest, most starved extent. We can also, to the other side, look at Guts, a man who realizes that he has no purpose besides surviving and wants something to survive for. I think with these two characters we can see two sides to an example of not having control even over your own will. One character's dreams and desires push him so far that he almost doesn't have control over his own actions. He's too in deep. On the other side of the spectrum, we have Guts, a character who in his raw essence is just trying to survive. He has no will. His will is to use his sword to cut people down. Off topic, but this reminds me a little bit of Attack on Titan with the concept of everyone is a slave to something. Speaking of which, I've thought about doing an Attack on Titan video. Let me know if you guys would like that. In fact, this juxtaposition between both of our characters' perspectives is what leads to the conflict with Guts leaving the Hawks after Griffith expresses his feelings towards dreams and how a man must have a dream. And we see that Guts kind of just is a struggler, a survivor, a simple man, some might say, which just doesn't line up with Griffith's values clearly because he's so enslaved by his own dream. I talk about that and much more in my video, Berserk, Is It Evil to Follow Your Dreams? Which will be linked somewhere convenient if you guys want to check that out. So men don't have any control, even over their own will. What about the rest of the excerpt from chapter 1 of the manga I was talking about? The rest of it goes, man takes up the sword in order to shield the small wound in his heart, sustained in a far-off time beyond remembrance. Man wields the sword so that he may die smiling in some far-off time beyond perception. Besides specifically talking about Guts, I think this is trying to say that our actions are determined subconsciously about our past experiences and our future ambitions. And I say subconsciously because I think it's these things, these desires that maybe we're not honest with about ourselves, or the past things that hurt us that again we're not honest with. Those are the things that control our will deep down inside of us. And I think the craziest part about this quote is how it says far off time beyond remembrance and far off time beyond perception, because It goes to show how we're doing these actions for reasons we don't even understand. We can't even remember the past thing that shaped us to be who we are, and we can't even see the person that we're going to be, that we're striving to be, that we are subconsciously acting and becoming. All that being said, looking back at how we don't have control, how is this not super depressing? We can't control our own ambitions. We're controlled by things from our past, our future desires. How do we get anything good out of all of this? Personally, I think it comes from self-reflection and trying to put your best foot forward in no matter the situation. And I know that it's corny, but with these quotes talking about wielding a sword to defend a wound or to end up dying happily, I think if we can find a way to find peace within ourselves, at some point we won't need to wield a sword for either of those reasons, because we'll be at peace. And I think the way to get there is to truly try to know yourself and be honest with yourself. The more honest you are with yourself, the less subconsciously you're controlled by these things that you don't understand, and the more conscious decisions that you can make to better yourself, to be a kinder, nicer guy.
I think it's safe to say that we all love a good conclusion, following a story for a set amount of time, only to have it wrap up in the most satisfying way possible. This video is not about that. This video is about how interesting a piece of art can be if it goes unfinished. One of the major topics of this channel and reason for making this video is Berserk. The 1997 anime leaves you wanting more, and of course I watched that before I read any of the manga, so being left at that cliffhanger set me on a downward spiral like nothing else. I couldn't absorb more media around Berserk if I wanted to, and it was because of the unanswered questions and insane cliffhanger that it left off on. Most importantly, it asks more questions that it answers, leaving you on the edge of your seat, needing more. If you don't know what I'm talking about with the end of the 1997 anime, it basically ends with a betrayal, the eclipse, and probably the most fantasy action part of the show up until that point. It kind of starts off as a medieval political war setting, and gets slightly more magical as it goes up until the end, where everything just explodes on its head. It's a huge twist and makes the show and story of the Golden Age what it is, and so deeply fascinating. And what's insane is Berserk, unfortunately, did this again with the passing of its author. But let's focus on the 1997 anime for now. First time I watched the show was in 2020, maybe 2021. And I didn't really have the drive to read the manga, go out and find it, so when the show ended, I was just left there with my thought. And for someone that likes to deep dive, has ADHD brain, and just hyper-focus on something, it was awesome. Left with all these questions and YouTube video essays, I went crazy. I had a great time. And eventually, by like 2022, 2023, I did start reading the manga, and I'm glad that I did. But before reading the manga, when it was just me after the eclipse sitting there thinking about what the heck is going to happen, I found my brain being more stimulated and just excited than ever before. And I think a major part of this was that the story was well crafted, but leaving off at a point such as that leaves you with endless possibilities for your brain to run wild. And then through online communities, when you hear stuff about Berserk, what actually happens later on in the manga, that like builds in your brain, but you don't fully understand it. So I was able to just like build and get excited about this world that I barely knew anything about, because it was just getting into it with the show, and then it got turned off. And eventually, of course, it did lead to me reading the manga and getting to see where the story was supposed to go, and not just what my brain could put together. So I manned up and finally decided to actually read the manga, only to have something similar happen again around 25 years later, after the 1997 anime got canceled. Unfortunately, the author of Berserk passed away, leaving his story unfinished, which means that, yeah, the story's been going on for a really long time. Of course, that's much sadder than just a show getting canceled. But now, once again, I'm in that spot that I was a couple years ago when I finished the anime, being able to workshop in my mind, theory craft, where the hell the story is going to go. And that's kind of exciting. Once again, being left with this endless possibility and wonder and sense of, I don't know what's going to happen next. Now, I do have to say that the story is going to be continued, just not by the original author. Apparently, the ending was sort of mapped out, so hopefully we will get a good, deserved conclusion to Berserk. But I think it's fair to say that it won't be exactly the same as what we would have got. And this is a good time to let your brain go wild, and that's exactly what I've been doing. I'm reminded of this video I watched by Solar Sands on YouTube, where he talks about Michelangelo's unfinished artwork. And you can see sculptures still cut in stone from Michelangelo, one of the most famous artists ever, that were never to be finished. And you can see what was done and then how it could have been finished. And I think that's really cool. You should definitely check out that video. We're going to get back to talking about anime, video games, a little bit of Dark Souls, Fullmetal Alchemist in just a second. First, I wanted to connect what I'm talking about with Berserk and Michelangelo's art to real life. There are so many stories that are cut short. You think you're going to get this rising action climax, falling action conclusion. It doesn't always happen. Stories end in the real world at all points. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's so many different stories and arcs that you're going to go through in your own life. Some ranging the entire 80 years you're going to be on this planet, where you get all the way to the conclusion. Some stopping at the rising action. Whether it falls short or goes all the way through, there's going to be so many different elements to your life that get started up. And sometimes closure isn't always guaranteed. How many times have you liked somebody, had a crush, and then it falls through, never talking to that person again? Oh, if I could only talk to her one more time. Oh, if I just said this one last thing. It doesn't typically happen, or sometimes it's better if that doesn't happen. Life is a game that's meant to not always have the conclusion. And sometimes it does, and it's awesome, and it feels great. That's why we love movies that have satisfying conclusions. But sometimes we don't get those conclusions, and that's why unfinished stories and artworks are important too. If you were paying attention, I just mentioned Fullmetal Alchemist, and in this context, with this video, I wanted to bring them up because of the fact that there's two different animes of Fullmetal Alchemist, the original and then Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. And what I find interesting about this is Fullmetal Alchemist had to rewrite the ending of the show because it didn't have any source material to go off of, eventually ending in a kind of cliffhanger with the show needing to be finished by a movie. Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, on the other hand, followed the source material all the way through, and we got the original ending that the author intended. What's so interesting about this is that the original show had to go out on a limb and kind of guesstimate how the show was supposed to end / make up their own ending to a story that was already written by somebody else with its own setups and arcs. Similar to how when we find a source of media that isn't finished, like the Michelangelo sculpture, you have to create the ending of the sculpture yourself. You have to chip away the stone and find something that makes sense with what's already been done in your own mind. The creators of the show had to do that. And then what's awesome about it is we also get the other side where, hey, we took a little bit more time, we finished Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, here is the actual ending. And then you get two comparisons of the original creator's intention and the creator of the first show's, different than the author, their headcanon of how it could end, which is something that I had to do with Berserk after I finished the 1997 anime, not reading the manga. Just kind of had to explore in my own mind where the heck things were going to go. I also think on a broader scope, the attraction I had to Berserk's story, especially when I didn't know where it was going is similar to why I like Dark Souls and the From Software games so much. They're so opaque and non-specific with things that it just lets your mind go crazy, go wild, and search for information out there on the internet as well. When I didn't read the manga for Berserk, I was watching video essays, I was absorbing information, I was kind of understanding, I was trying to put it together, and I loved it. And then if you play something like Dark Souls, through Elden Ring, any of those games, you realize that you're given like a little bit of information. If you really want to dive deep, you can get more information. If you play the game again, you'll get more information. If you look online, you get more information. And it's all just kind of this vague of a story that's amazing that hopefully one day you can understand, which can be very frustrating, and I see that, but for whatever reason, it works so well, and it's addictive in a beautiful outside looking in on this world that doesn't make any sense kind of way. I would like to say that obscurity and cliffhangers are not always a good thing. In fact, they can be extremely frustrating depending on the story. However, when done right, or if it's not an intentional cliffhanger, but just one that has to happen, that is when my brain gets addicted. I think I'd like to end this video by talking about how without stories that aren't finished, you can't get the sense of relief from a great conclusion. Without bad stories, you can't have good stories. Without simple story structures, you can't have complex and vague ones. All of these things work together, and you should try to appreciate all of them. And with Berserk not ending with the original author writing it, I think that there's a certain mystique around Berserk. There always has been for me. And this is just another layer of that, like what could have been. It's been a very highly regarded story and mystery, and something I've pondered on for so long that not having a clear-cut ending almost adds to that and will like continue its legacy forever. Recently, I was going through all of Berserk and rereading it, and I found a chapter that I absolutely adored, and I wanted to highlight it, and it's probably not the chapter that you're thinking of. There's a whole bunch you could be thinking of. It's not any of them. I'm talking about Bubbles of Futility. Hopefully I can explain some of the symbolism that I see and the reasons why I really like it. The chapter opens with Guts looking upon Casca on the boat that they just seized to go to the fairy island. And when he looks at Casca, it kind of blurs out something that he's been struggling with is controlling himself before he even got the Berserk armor. So now with the Berserk armor, he's kind of off the rails. He's not currently wearing it, but when he looks at Casca, he kind of freaks out a little bit. And you can see that he's disappointed in himself. Beautifully, at the same time, we get multiple character interactions, the most interesting of which is the astral projection of two of our characters, Farnese and the Witch. While this is going on, Roderick comes out to talk to Guts. And I don't know about you guys, but I thought Roderick was going to be a total dick when he was introduced. I thought bro was a bad guy. Like, there's no shot Prince Charming over here is going to be a good dude, but it seems alright so far. Roderick decides to talk to Guts. And what do they talk about? But what Casca means to Guts, which we already got a little bit of a hint towards the drama as Guts watches Casca from afar and has a reaction. During this conversation, Casca gets distracted by a bird and is climbing off in the distance. As the gentlemen watch from afar and Casca is getting further away from them, unbeknownst to them, I was going to come in and say, you should subscribe. Here's the chart that shows that 99% of my viewers aren't subscribed, that people always show. Wow, that's a crazy big number. You should subscribe. I'm still under 10 videos on this channel, but I'm working on it, and I really like some of the recent ones that I've done. I've done like 4 videos on Berserk, a whole bunch on Dark Souls, so subscribe, check those out. And thank you so much for watching. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Unbeknownst to them, the astral projection ladies that kind of have a thing for Guts are listening
and the tension is becoming too great. As Guts is about to answer, they both wake up because they got too distracted. Which it's just like a funny like build up. I mean, Guts is the coolest dude that they're ever gonna meet, so of course they're like, "That's my boy." Another added bonus to this scene is Guts hasn't really been very forthcoming with his past to any member of his new gang, so they don't know what Casca is to him. And with everything that happened with Griffith and the eclipse before Casca lost her mind, we don't know what Guts would even say, of course. Like, we as the viewer don't know what he would say. Of course, we'd probably think that he would say, "She's my lover, she's my boo thing, she's my girlfriend," but it's clearly more complicated than that, and that's kind of what the chapter is getting towards. So with Farnese and the witch waking up in their cabins because they were startled, too nervous to hear the answer of what Guts says about what Casca is to him, Casca gets in a little bit of trouble, which of course means Guts has to run over to rescue her before he can answer. Even more tension, still leaving Guts' past in the past, not bringing it into his new group of friends. Casca runs further away from Guts. At this point in the story, she's actually scared of him, and he is begging her to come back. Of course, because there is this, dangerous situation going on, but it also kind of symbolizes what's going on with them emotionally. Bro really wants Casca to come back. He's reaching out, but she's climbing further and further away from him, and eventually gets to a point where she's cornered and she jumps away. Guts is able to grab her, but she slips out of his grasp. A grasp specifically with his metal arm. So Casca falls into the water, and Guts, of course, jumps right into the water to save her. And it's almost as if right when he caught up to Casca to bring her back, she slips out of his grasp. I wonder if that happens later in the story. Probably not. I wouldn't worry about it. So Guts bravely jumps into the water where he goes to save Casca, and he gets to reminisce about all the other times Casca has needed saving from him, which usually involves water. And the author makes a great little reference to that, and he shows all their past dealings where Casca tries to jump off a waterfall or has a battlefield issue and Guts has to save her. And then we get this really cool panel where we see Guts's berserker vision and the eclipse kind of melded together. Really cool visual that I think is pretty dope. We find out that Guts risked his life for Casca, probably wasn't going to be able to save her alone, and the gang actually are the ones that get Casca and Guts after he risked everything to save her from the water. From there, we find out everything's fine. Guts is just in bed, which he is for a lot. The cycle of the story is Guts goes absolutely crazy on a bad guy, gets super hurt, then has to put on the armor again so he doesn't feel pain, and gets even more hurt, and then goes back to bed. It just happens when you're a powerhouse and all you have is the berserk armor, I guess. So he is back in bed healing, thinking about what just happened, reminiscing, and we get this absolutely banger kind of realization. It almost feels like foreshadowing / the theme that what seems to be going on through all of this later part of Berserk, where Guts has forgotten that he replaced his arm, and he realizes that it is different. And he says, even if you force back what is lost, it still won't be the same as it was. Talking about his arm, as well as talking about Casca. What I really like about this is the whole mission, Guts' whole purpose in life is to restore Casca's memories, to get her back, because she's literally all he thinks about and obsesses over. But in a way, he is forcing it back. She lost her mind, and he's going on this journey to get it back. And something that you just learn in life is you can't force relationships, you can't force someone to like you, you can't force someone to love you, you can't force someone to do
pretty much anything. All you can do is control yourself, and this whole mission is Guts trying to force Casca back. And it is noble, and I think we can agree with Guts, and we want him to succeed. This is not some creepy guy trying to force a girl to date him. This is a dude trying to get his friend's mind back, which was completely stolen from her. But I love the message of, even if you force something back, it won't be the same as it was. And it kind of harpens back to the saying that you'll never run into the same river twice. I don't know if you guys have heard that, but basically, even if you go to the same river every single day, it's different water, it's different fish, the water is always changing, and you'll never find the same person twice. Even if you hang out with your best buddy Todd one day, a year later you hang out with Todd again, he's gonna be a different person. That's just how it works. He's got new memories, new experiences, new life lessons, new thoughts. And he might basically be the same, but you're never gonna meet the same person twice. You're never gonna find the same river twice. And Guts is never gonna get the same Casca twice. I know what you're thinking. Is it really necessary to spend this much time analyzing a single panel of Berserk? Well, with a little bit of context and a brief summary of the chapter, I'm confident I can prove to you why this panel is so frickin' cool. First, here's a summary of the chapter, Cracks in the Blade. We find our best buddy Guts reuniting with his friends Ricket, Erica, and the near-death blacksmith, Guldo. Prior to this, Guts was out on his own adventure, seeking revenge, hunting down apostles, while Ricket and gang were watching over Casca. Unfortunately, they weren't the best and allowed Casca to escape, and Guts wasn't too happy about this. After a heated discussion, Guts was called out for abandoning Casca himself and instead focusing on revenge, which is a big theme of this chapter and Berserk overall. Sadly, as I mentioned, this is where Guts and the reader find out about Guldo's situation, and after Guts goes up the stairs, Guldo drops this banger line. Being a blacksmith, Guldo asks to see Guts' equipment, remarking the considerable wear and tear that's occurred, stating that it's 5 times more than what he would expect. So yeah, Guts has been pretty busy. At this point in the story, Guts is fueled by revenge, and Guldo thinks this is a foolish endeavor and offers Guts his advice. Run away. This is where we start getting the more important themes of this chapter. The main one is covering up sorrow with hate, and Guldo says this pretty blatantly to Guts here. And then in the most metaphorical sense, which is very important, he relates Guts to a blood-rusted sword, one that is about to crumble away. Seeking revenge after revenge will lead Guts to nothing. Again, doubling down on Guts being a sword, he says that Guts is full of cracks. Of course, this reminds us of the title of the chapter, Cracks in the Blade. Another important thing that's happening is Guts is having a freak out, explaining how he lost all of his comrades and how they died like bugs, basically. Guldo throws back in his face that through his act of revenge, he has abandoned the only irreplaceable things he has left, which is friends, loved ones, people you care about. The main point of this part is that Guts was too scared to wallow in the sorrow and take care of the few friends he had left, and instead chose the easier route of hatred and to go out on his own. Now, as I was paraphrasing for most of the chapter, I'm going to read the last couple panels as they're what the main video is about. You're like a drawn sword on the battlefield, one with countless nicks, soaked in blood and rusting, with a lethal crack in it. A sword that's begun to break. Now that we have a summary of the chapter, I'm going to pull back and give a little bit of context and actually go all the way back to chapter 1 of Berserk. This is the opening to chapter 1 of Berserk and also the iconic opening before every single episode of the 1997 Berserk anime.
In this world, is the destiny of mankind controlled by some transcendental entity or law? Is it like the hand of God hovering above? At least it is true that man has no control, even over his own will.
However, the anime leaves out this second part. Man takes up the sword in order to shield the small wound in his heart, sustained in a far-off time beyond remembrance. Man wields the sword so that he may die smiling in a far-off time beyond perception. I actually did a video where I covered this way more in depth called The Philosophy of Early Berserk, so you should go watch that after this. Clearly there's a lot of symbolism behind the sword in Berserk. I brought up this quote from earlier in the story because it ties deeply to what Godot is talking about in this chapter. Also, if you look back into the Golden Age, while Griffith is defined by his dream, Guts is clearly defined by his sword, even fighting 100 men just because it's not in his nature to run away. The first part of this quote is especially relevant here because Guts is picking up his sword to shield himself from the loss of the Band of the Hawk. Only this time he's being called out for it. While Guts has always been associated with the sword, this time it's bloody, rusty, and bound to break. So what's so cool about this panel? Well, for one, it was an easy way to make you listen to an analysis of a really good chapter and a really important theme to Berserk. But there is actually something significant that I wanted to outline, and a really good use of symbolism and just artistic vision. Throughout this chapter, we've seen a beam of light pierce through the attic where Guts and Godot are having their conversation. And in the first part of this image, you see Guts looking down at Godot with the beam of light piercing him. As it zooms out from this scene, the beam of light, to me, looks like a sword that is piercing Guts. Guts, the character that's been represented by a sword throughout the story and this conversation. At first glance, it's just a beam of light, but through some creative storyboarding and positioning, this beam of light also represents Guts, who was being called a sword. I think that's genius. I really like that. Another cool aspect of this is you could see it as the sword piercing Guts, literally wounding him because he's so wounded at this part of the story. He lost the Band of the Hawk, and he hasn't even started to heal yet. So the sword is piercing him, wounding him. I think that's also a cool interpretation. So why do we care, and how do you apply it to your life? Well, for one, I think the main takeaway is that you shouldn't push people away. You know, sometimes terrible things happen to us. We all grieve, we all lose, we all fail, but there's people around us, and life is meaningless without them. And so Guts lost pretty much the most you could lose. All of his friends, his best friend he lost to his own ambition, anyone and anything he's ever had, his family, is gone. But there's still 2 members left that he could have looked after, being Ricket and Casca, but instead he chose to go off on his own, angry, sad, and alone. I also want to point out that I think one of the main things Berserk tries to point out throughout the entire story is you could focus on what you lost, or you could focus on what you still have. We see Guts kind of grapple with the idea of going for revenge against Griffith or helping Casca. And I think the story is trying to say, focus on what you still have, not on what you lost. Also, don't get revenge, but I feel like that's every story's theme, you know what I'm saying? And I wouldn't mind if Guts got revenge, because revenge is cool sometimes. And for me, reading the story, before this point and before Guts actually gets Casca back, Guts seems like a scoundrel not really having a good time, whereas after that point, when he gets his new gang going, looking for the fairy island, he just seems to be in such a better place because he has a friend group again. He learned to trust people again. So I think the biggest takeaway that you can get from this is not to push away people, to not take people for granted. And of course, just like any other anime or manga, the power of friendship beats everything. That was obviously a joke, but I think there is some truth to that. So if you haven't called your mom recently, maybe call your mom. And if you have a long distance friend, maybe play some Fortnite with them. I don't know. Whatever you like to do.
A sword is a tool meant to kill. Why do you need it? Whose life do you intend to take?
Enemies.
Late last year, I was introduced to Vinland Saga through Instagram Reels, which I know is a weird way to find out about an anime. I was in a weird spot at the time, so I found myself in this self-improvement, David Goggins type algorithm, and I also like Goku.
This is going to be so cool!
So I got the anime side of it too, and somehow through the scrolling, beyond Berserk and, you know, the occasional Naruto Goku post, there was a lot of Vinland Saga, a show I had never heard of before, and I'm not gonna lie, it got me interested. While I started watching Vinland Saga, I found myself noticing something quite interesting. A hint, little teaspoon of Berserk. There's a whole bunch of Berserk references in the 2 seasons that are out now. And so I just wanted to make a video of maybe 5 Berserk references in Vinland Saga. Some of these connections are like 100%, and others are just kind of loosey-goosey, feely-wheely. The first Berserk Easter egg that I want to talk about that's in Vinland Saga, Canute walking on a path of corpses just like Griffith does in the Eclipse of Berserk. It's actually the only one that I found people talking about online, and the one that kind of validated the fact that this video can exist. It's so comparable that I found this image, and I think it's really dope. It's literally the two combined. There's almost a sunken ship fallacy of dead people, where they're like, well, you know, all these people died already for what we're trying to do, so why not add a couple more bodies to that?
It is true. Men possess a side that is barbarous.
A really cool reference to show that both of these characters are willing to step all over people to get what they want. I think it shows how Canute and Griffith are similar characters, which is honestly a pretty good segue. Having the bangs and the long hair is pretty distinct for anime characters, or just characters in general. They're also described similarly, with boyish charm, or maybe even looking more like a princess than a prince. And Canute was a clear reference to Griffith. In fact, it was the first thing in the show that made me go, this looks like Berserk. Canute kind of did become less of a chill guy, just like how Griffith wasn't very chill during the eclipse. So we're going to talk about the Berserker mushroom that Bjorn eats. It's probably going to be the weakest one. Of course, in Berserk, there's the Berserker armor, and they don't work exactly the same. One is a mushroom, the other is a set of armor. There is similar attributes that the characters get from these Berserker items, I suppose. Mainly kind of going a little crazy and not feeling pain. Okay, so I did a little bit of research. Vikings actually used to have a class called Berserkers that allegedly would eat these mushrooms. So clearly the Vinland Saga Bjorn mushroom was more of a reference to that. But the fact that they're called Berserkers and the effects are similar to the Berserker armor, I think that the origins could be connected. Probably both of these things just tie back to actual history. Like I said, this was probably the worst connection, and we're about to get into my favorite of the video, so keep watching. Since I have you here, I might as well tell you that I make these videos about anime, video games, mainly Dark Souls, Berserk so far, but we'll see what happens. I basically just try to talk about things that interest me, themes, with good, positive, real-world messages that hopefully you can take away. That's the goal of my channel. I'm super small, so maybe you can hop in early, or maybe I go nowhere. I don't know, I just wanted to throw that out there. Feel free to sub. Towards the end of the season in Vinland Saga, we have Askeladd versus Thorfinn on top of a snowy hill. This evoked a strong feeling of Guts versus Griffith, which is probably the most impactful fight that happens in the Golden Age. Now, I will admit that it's not a perfect one-to-one comparison,
Honestly, that's a good thing. If it was a one-to-one comparison, then why would we watch Vinland Saga? I actually like the way that Vinland Saga incorporates parts of Berserk into different aspects of the story, but let's talk about how it is kind of a reference. Number one is the setting. I mean, snowy hill. Also, it takes place towards the end of the plot of the Golden Age and the first season of Vinland Saga. A third thing is the roles between the people involved. Askeladd and Griffith are commanders of a band of mercenaries, where Guts and Thorfinn are those commanders' best tools for combat. One really big thing that I need to say is, despite having a similar setup and evoking this feeling towards Berserk, Vinland Saga's result of this fight could not be further from Berserk. In fact, like, the exact opposite happens. In Berserk, where Guts wins, Thorfinn, of course, loses once again. Although this scene really makes me think of Berserk, I do see that what happens is not like Berserk. While having different effects on the plot, a big reason why I find this reference so important is it was the point in the story where I really was hit with, okay, this is somewhat related. I had Canute's haircut to be like, okay, that's kind of like Griffith. But this was before the scene where we see Canute walk on that pile of corpses, which is 100% a callback to Berserk. So this is where it really hit me in the noggin, and I was like, okay, we have some Berserk going on here. And it leads into my next point, which is going to be the final connection to Berserk from Vinland Saga that I'm going to talk about. The last connection between these two stories is the dynamic between the characters in the first season of Vinland Saga and the Golden Age of Berserk. I would actually say that Vinland Saga very smartly twists our expectations of what we've seen in Berserk and tells a different story. This connects again with the last battle on top of that snowy hill. The season's wrapping up. We're expecting Thorfinn to finally one-up Askeladd after all this time, and he doesn't. Just like how that is a twist of our expectation, especially with what we've seen with Guts and Griffith, when we get to the Band of the Hawks, we see that Guts begrudgingly joins them, is actually won over by Griffith because he loses a battle to him, and then eventually becomes a strong and important member. With Thorfinn, there's a couple moments where you'd expect something similar to happen, but almost comically, Thorfinn every single time is like, heck no, I am not your friend, to multiple characters that are almost even nice to him, so he never integrates into his band of mercenaries. So, well, of course, I think this is a connection between these two stories. I think they actually work as a foil to each other, a purposeful foil. I would say the impression that I got was that the writer of Vinland Saga really liked the Golden Age of Berserk, but wanted to twist it and make it his own, and I think he did a very successful job of that. Even with Guts and Griffith's iconic duels, one at the very beginning, one at the end, it's just more expanded with Askeladd and Thorfinn. And kind of ironically, at the end of the Golden Age 1997 anime, you're kind of left with this feeling of like, how could Griffith do this? At the end of season 1 of Vinland Saga, I was left with like, man, I kind of like Askeladd. I wish Thorfinn would stop trying to kill him. The author of Vinland Saga just did a great job of taking the setup of Berserk, twisting it, and then completely changing our expectations throughout the season.